All right.
Got it.
Well, welcome everybody. It's Friday afternoon. It's September, which is my birthday month. I'm not a birthday person, but I am trying to be this year to celebrate myself and celebrate wins and celebrate all of you and just celebrate in general, because we don't do enough of that. I am Dr. Rachel Rubin. I am a urologist in the Washington, D.C. area, and I did a fellowship in sexual medicine. So I take care of everybody who has any kind of sexual health problem from the medical side of things. My right-hand human, who happens to be on my left-hand side right now, go ahead, you can introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Andrea Martin. I'm the nurse practitioner working with Dr. Rubin. I guess I'm like the Robin and you're the Batman. Right?
Yeah, I guess so. Like, yeah, that's reasonable.
Like that.
She's my
I'm Robin.
co-pilot. She's my co-pilot in this mission. And so Andrea started about 5 months ago. We're so happy to have her. It's really incredible what she has brought to the practice. And we're just having a lot of fun here. I want to introduce a very special guest today. And this makes me feel like a celebrity to know you and to have you agree to do this for us. Dr. Kelly Casperson, I'm going to let her fully introduce herself because I'm going to get all the details wrong, but I'll say some just personal things. She's a urologist who one day just started becoming interested in women's sexual health. And let me tell you, women's sexual health is always at the bottom of the totem pole. I mean, in urology, we deal with men, we deal with erections, we deal with things that really matter, right? Like kidney stones and prostate cancer and bladders. Women's sexual health never matters. And Dr. Casperson, and I want to hear how she got into this and why she decided to care about this, but all of a sudden her eyes opened, she started giving a crap about this. And so she started asking questions and she started reaching out and she became my friend and she started showing up. And when I tell you this woman has read every book, has devoured every piece of material, knows more about this than the people who basically do the research studies. It's incredible to watch her journey from someone who, and she'll probably tell you, was a general urologist and then became the superstar sexual medicine expert, really. And it has been a joy to watch her journey and to support her every step of the way. And she's been an incredible inspiration to me of like, oh my God, she just started a podcast and has 3 bajillion followers. And she just keeps doing incredible things. She is my sister on the West Coast. We have met each other in person quite a few times now, but we used to say that we were very good friends before we had ever met in person. She wrote a book. It's called You Are Not Broken. It's based on her podcast, You Are Not Broken. And if you haven't listened to it, you are missing out. She is just incredible. So Kelly Casperson, why don't you give your real bio and introduce yourself?
That was so lovely though. Thank you. That hashtag that. From Minnesota, raised Catholic, which is important when we talk about sex, I think. And went to med school in Minnesota, then moved to Denver, did residency, found the husband, then moved to Washington State. So I keep moving west, but now my chief resident lives in Hawaii. And I said, I won't move any more west. I'm as west as I'm going to go. And was here for 7 years, practicing general urology, focusing on women, because as a female urologist, that tends to self-select, doing a lot of like bladder leakage, prolapse. And I still do a lot of that. And I still like the kidney stones and things like that. But 7 years into a career, as people know, like you get good at your job and you get a little bit like not satisfied by seeing the same. Like it literally was like, I'm going to see recurrent UTIs for the rest of my career. And is that enough for me from like an intellectual satisfaction sort of standpoint? And so it was like ripe in the time when like I was ready to be stimulated again. And I had this patient who I actually did a radical cystectomy on. So like the most dramatic, severe surgery you can do for invasive bladder cancer. Big surgery. Took her through her recovery. Now just seeing her every year for like checkups, right? So I got to know her. So she was like the right person to change my life. And I actually just saw her last week. I gave her a plant in my book and I said, thank you for changing my life, because she truly changed my life. And how she did that is one of our yearly checkups. She started crying in my office and saying, yeah, I love my husband. We have a wonderful marriage. We've built this life together and we don't have sex. And I'm very sad, and I'm sad for him and I'm sad for me. And I handed her a box of Kleenex and like lightning struck my brain, because in residency, I was literally told, do a fellowship so you don't have to deal with women. Because it is assumed that women are difficult, we're challenging, we take too long at the doctor's office, We don't have answers because we're complicated. Like these are not things I've made up. These are things that were told to me in my socialization to become a surgeon. And lightning struck. And I was like, well, who's taking care of the people that we're giving all the Viagra to the people they're sleeping with, right? Like who's taking care of that other 50%? And is it true that we're complicated? I don't know, because when you kind of wave your hand at like you're complicated, it's a way to kind of dismiss the conversation, right? And so it was the time where I was like, let's find out. Let's see if we know anything about female sexual function. And that was like finding Irwin Goldstein and finding, the big books of Come As You Are and Becoming Clitorate and, all of that stuff, and finding Ishwish and being like, we actually know a lot, but it's not getting out, right? And I actually had this voice in my head that was like, you got to talk. Because now I knew a lot, right? But it was just like me seeing people in clinic, knowing a lot about female sex med. And my voice was like, you got to talk. And I was like, I don't really like podcasts a lot. Maybe I'll just start a podcast. And I did. And that was 2.5 years ago. And it's like internationally successful and been nominated for awards. And like, here we are, because I started talking. I'm like, the scientists and the researcher people don't actually know how to communicate to the people. And so I'm like, I was actually just thinking today, I'm like, I don't write the news, but I read the news. And that's like where my skill is in like translating it. There we go.
That's you.
That's the magic.
How long has it been since, I know you said 2.5 years since you started your podcast. When, like, how long ago was that kind of light bulb moment when you're like, I got to do something about this. I have to learn this, to the place where you are now?
Oh, like when did that lightning bolt happen? 3 years ago. Yeah. I mean, I don't remember the day, but
Yeah,
it was
no.
like,
But that's amazing to look at all the changes, and you wrote a book, you have a podcast, and you're an expert in this.
So
it's
Kelly
amazing.
Casperson, when she says she's going to do something, it turns out she just does it. And then when you ask, when you're like, well, I can't do that. And then she'll look at you and she's like, yeah, you can. And then you have no excuses, because then you're like, oh, well, Kelly did it. So what has it been? So tell people about the book. What I love about the book. So for anyone, and I'll say it again, You Are Not Broken. It's really an incredible read. I read this on an airplane actually to Texas. It was about a 3-hour airplane ride with 2 kids on the other side. They were sitting next to my husband, but I was like nearby, and I literally didn't look up, and I finished it by the end of the plane ride. It was a pretty quick read, which is what I love about it, because it's and I know that was the point of it. It is digestible. It is actionable. It is so incredibly hopeful, which is what I love for my patients. Is I need them to have, I need them to understand the hope. I need them to understand that there is science, there's biology, there's things we can do to help. But yeah, there's a lot of psychosocial stuff out there. And you just summarize all of the sex therapy, and you're like, here's the data, here's the science, and here's the sex therapy stuff, and here's why you are not broken. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but like when I see a patient in clinic and they're like, hey, you gave me hope, like that is like the biggest, like, yes, I did my job for the day, right? Like there's really something to that, like that's stuff you don't never learn in med school. Like your job's to give people hope of like, yeah, because they don't think there's any hope, because they don't know all this stuff, right? But where really the whole like desire thing for me was like, I was talking to a very well-known female sexual person who's well known, and they were talking about desire, and I was like, well, yeah, but you're assuming that she's having good sex to begin with. And they were like, well, yeah, of course she's having great sex, she just has low desire. And that was like another lightning bolt moment of like, oh, the men don't understand low desire, in that like you can't desire anything that's kind of mushy broccoli to begin with, right? And so like, that was a big thing for me of like, here I'd been paying attention to all these experts spew on what they knew about low desire. And I was like, they don't understand that the sex isn't good in the first place. And we also have to address that if we think we're going to touch low desire.
You said this once, and it blew my brains out, is you say, and I say it all the time now, because is the sex that you're having even worth wanting? is the sex you're having even worth wanting? And that is just like, again, that lightning bolt for me of like getting people to understand, well, what kind of sex are you having and what do you actually want? And the data shows, right? Men would have again, in heterosexual relationships that we're speaking of specifically, is men would have sex the same way every single time. That's what the data seems to show. Obviously, nothing is all or nothing. And women need passion and fantasy and new things. And actually, there's some data to show that women cheat a little bit more because of that. And so I think, for it's a really good point, is if it's monotonous, if it's the same thing all the time, it does become a checkbox, a thing to like, okay, let's just check, did the checklist. How do people get their brains out of the checklist? Like, what are actionable things that people can do to have more fun, to have better sex?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think it always starts with awareness of where you're at, right? Because what I see a lot of is like women will be like, and again, we stereotype, but we do it for a reason in sex med, but women will be like, well, I don't even know if I like sex. Maybe I'm just somebody who doesn't like sex, right? Because they almost doubt that they're a sexual being because they've never been given, or they've never tried, or whatever. They've never had great sex, right? So they almost like doubt that it's even worth, it's like being like, Rachel, you know that there's like purple unicorns in Florida? And you're like, I don't know about that. I've never been there. Like, it's almost a foreign thing of like, sex can be a very wonderful thing for you, but you might not even believe me because you've just been having mush broccoli for dinner, right? So it's almost like realizing where we are to say like, what would it be like to get where this is good? And a lot of it's the uncomfortable stuff, right? Like discomfort is the price of change of like, you might have to learn to touch yourself. You might have to learn to talk to your spouse about this. You might have to learn to stop settling for mush broccoli for dinner every night. Like, cause I think so many people are like, well, I just need to buy like the supplement or the pill or the new vibrator or the piece of lingerie. Like we go looking for these solutions and these simple bits and realizing like, those are just shiny things that you can spend money on. It's really changing who you are being in that sexual relationship.
Can you say that again? Discomfort is the price of change. I love that so much. That's your coaching brain. That's your coaching brain. Go ahead.
That's my coaching brain. Yeah. And to get into like, why did I get into coaching? Right. Again, I think having that conversation with that very well-known sex expert and me realizing like, I might have something to say here because I see this very differently than how even the experts are seeing low desire. So that was number one of like, oh, they think we're all just having good sex. That's not true. And then the second thing is like, the brain is our biggest sex organ, right? And it's like Dr. Rubin and I and Andrea, we can give you like great estrogenized vulvas, and we can tell you like a good vibrator for like narrowed vaginas post-menopause. And we can really get the pelvis. If you have a penis, we can get the penis working. But if you think, it's the thoughts we think about sex, right? Like it's hard, it's not fun, it takes a lot of work. I never have an orgasm anyways, my thighs are too jiggly. Like it's all these thoughts about sex that end up limiting our sex life. Even if we have this, air quotes, perfect pelvis, we've got to work on the brain. So when I discovered coaching, I'm like, oh, desire is a thought and a feeling, and we can work on that.
You mentioned just now how sometimes the first step is kind of even realizing that like, actually, maybe I don't have the best sex life. How do you go from that step to now I have to address this with the person that I love, that, I don't want to hurt their feelings, and I don't even know what kind of change it is that I need. Like, how do people start that conversation? Because I think people have a really hard time with that.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I mean, like I can talk about this so easily now because I've been doing
divorce. Divorce is the only answer, right?
Well, yeah.
That sounds expensive though. So let's talk about less expensive options.
What I find, what's like, you want to do it in a non-threatening way, right? So you're always going to talk about I've been listening to this podcast and I read this book, and did you know that 70% of women don't have an orgasm by putting something in their vagina? That just blew my mind. So it's really like your exploration of the facts, and you're just kind of sharing facts as a way to warm it up. Because if you go in accusing your partner of, you never give me an orgasm and I fake it 50% of the time, and we got to figure this out, and it's all on you to give me an orgasm, you're going to get a way different outcome than if you're like, I don't seem to enjoy sex as much as you do. And I wonder if there could be a way where I can enjoy it as much as you, so it's more equal. Could you help me could you help me kind of figure that out? I have no idea what I'm doing because I've never done this before. So it almost opens up like a vulnerability, right? Without accusing, and in a way of like, it's a partnership. Because really, if you have sex in a relationship, it's two people trying to figure it out. But it's a lot of it's like, so I think so many people have this duty sex or this like just have an orgasm because that's what he needs. I see a lot of, I'm going to control his behavior by having sex with him so he doesn't get grumpy and mopey, right? And realize you're never going to desire sex if that's what sex is.
So how do you get out of that routine? How do you coach these women or the people that you work with to get out of that routine?
Yeah. I mean, I think first of it, like the first step again is like, why are you having sex? What does sex mean for you? And just understanding what sex means for you.
Tell people about, sorry to interrupt you, but tell people about Cindy Meston's How Many Reasons People Have Sex. I love that.
237.
There's 237 reasons that Cindy Meston in Austin, Texas, who's awesome and also comes to Swish. She's amazing. What were the most interesting reasons people have sex? Oh,
crazy reasons. Like, things like because we all think like the reason that I have sex is the reason that you have sex, right? And those two people are usually living in a house and we don't even know why our partner likes to have, like, what's their reason for sex? And so really understanding like what sex means to you. And if sex to you is just like this thing I do to keep you happy so you're not grumpy, like you're never going to love sex. But reasons are like, because like crazy reasons, like I wanted revenge, or I wanted to feel good, I wanted to sleep, I wanted to get pregnant, I wanted to make somebody jealous, there's like all these different reasons. And her research specifically was like specifically the very last time you had sex, what was the reason for it? And we're like, it's very rare that anybody has sex to make a baby, by the way. Yeah, because
I have two. I regret it both times, but
right. Yeah. Like we'd be having sex 1.7 times in America because that's how many babies we make on average. But yeah, I think that it's communicating, and it's, again, discomfort's the price of growth, but really in your relationship of like, I'm having sex with you to control your behavior. Wow. Like, what does that mean? And is it my job to have sex with you to control your behavior? Right. And again, more in a loving thing of like, you know what sex means for me? Sex is just something like I do before we fall asleep, so you're not grumpy the next day. I wonder if sex could mean something different for me. Would you help me figure out what that is?
Go ahead.
I was going to say another reason is like for relationships to be like, when I say no to sex tonight, it means I still love you, and it might be a hell yes tomorrow, but no means no. No doesn't mean until you convince me. And I think boundaries, especially for women in married relationships, of like boundaries of like, when she says no and it's a firm no, she has all the more ability to say yes when it's a yes.
I love that. And I also, I think that you are bridging a gap that is even more important, is that gap between the doctor's office and the sex therapist's office, because it is a big ask for me to tell my patients, hey, you need to invest the time and the money into sex therapy, because not everyone, I don't think, needs sex. I think everyone would benefit from sex therapy, but there's a big jump to like sitting in a sex therapist chair and doing that work. And I think you're really bridging that gap by bringing people together, by having your podcast, by letting people think on their own in their car, on their commute, of like giving people something to think about. And what I love is that you're able to really synthesize the sex therapy research, but really also look at the medicine and the biology and the physiology. And that is a gap that really hasn't been, like what you did hasn't been done before in a good way, is you are taking the sex therapy world, which is very anti-medicine, is very anti-intervention, is very anti the biological piece. And then you're taking the biological piece, which is really anti the psychosocial piece, because it wants that to be important. And you're saying, no, guys, like it actually really does work together. And you're translating it for people who don't necessarily understand that there are two camps, and that we don't all, that we don't always agree. And so what do you think, like, how do you get people either into sex therapy or talking about these things and like actually doing action? Because it's not enough to understand and agree, but we have to like make change and do. You have to learn to do. So how can we get people to learn? I agree what she's saying. This lady is very smart. I believe with what she's saying, but now I have to do it. How do I say it? How do I how do I make change?
Yeah. Well, I think the first, everybody's going to start from a different place, but I think the first is education. And that's why I love this book. And I think that's what a lot of sex therapist is just people just need education, right? Of like, I'm going to stereotype, he thinks that she should like sex the way he likes sex. But he doesn't know any better, right? He didn't learn that the clitoris is the way that she needs to have an orgasm. And he didn't learn that the penis isn't the bee's knees for, accomplishing all these tasks. And so it's like a lot of sex therapy is just education, which I think you can now get with the podcast and the book and, stuff like that. So to think the other thing with like coaching versus therapy is like therapy kind of stems from like, you're broken, let's figure out the pathology and let's fix it, versus like, you're not broken. You just need some tools and some skills.
Right. Serena Williams has a coach, right? Like she is definitely not broken. Like,
right.
People at the top of their game have executive coaches. And so having someone come in, and that's what I tell people about sex therapy or working with coaches or things like that is you don't go when you're on the brink of divorce. You don't go when you hate each other's guts. It's not going to work, right? They're going to talk about other things. You do sex therapy or this kind when things are good, when you need to learn how to talk different or communicate differently or show up a different person, like that's when you do it. And I think that's really important.
And there's nothing that we all do that we couldn't do better. Like this applies to everyone across the board. Like we're not all experts in everything. Like there's always somebody that can teach you something else that is so useful in your life.
I love that. That's Rachel's quote of like, nobody's so good
at sex, they can't get better. Okay, but so what was the hardest chapter to write? Which one did you not write for, like that you sat on that you were like, oh, which was your frog that you had to eat the frog?
I think of being trained as a surgeon to write the chapter of like how to legitimately talk to your partner about this, because to me, I'm like, who am I? To like tell people what to do or how to do it. And because really a lot of like, and this is what I want people to know, like your great sex life is nobody's great sex life is an accident. It is not an accident. And we sit around thinking like, well, someday when I'm 10 pounds thinner or my husband works less or, whatever our excuse is, it'll just be this amazing sex life. And to realize like, that's a myth that doesn't exist. And think of it like exercising, right? Like, well, when someday I'll exercise, it's like being fit isn't an accident. We prioritize it. And I think a lot of people in relationships are like, we got into this because it was a sexual relationship. Do we want that long term or do we not? And if we don't, great. But are we both agreeing on that? And is that what's working best for the relationship? Because I think a lot of times somebody will just decide this is how many times we need to have sex, or we're never going to have sex again. And then they wonder why the relationship is really having a problem now because we didn't negotiate it in the terms of what was a sexual relationship.
I use your example all the time, and I did it at least 3 times today with patients where it says, okay, and we see in my office, right, we take care of all genders for all types of sexual problems. It is not a stereotype in my office. We have every type of relationship and we have every type of libido where it doesn't matter, someone's going to have a higher libido than someone else. And so it's always saying, okay, is it the job of the person whose libido is high to come down to the floor where the person whose libido is low? And alternatively, is it the job of the person whose libido is low to come all the way to the person whose libido is high? Like this idea that one of them has to go all the way down or up to the other level is just not realistic. So what do you tell people with that?
Yeah. The libido for the relationship is what's to be negotiated, right? Because I think, again, stereotypically, the low person thinks they're right, the high person thinks they're right, and they think the other person's broken. And again, I think, what you say, you call it like sex exceptionalism of like, we do this all the time. Like you might love going out for pizza and your husband's like, yeah, like twice a year would be fine. Right. And you're like, we negotiate stuff in relationships all the time, only to normalize it and say like, we do this all the time with everything else. We just find it challenging to talk about sex. But really what works for the partnership and the relationship. And again, understanding like some people need to feel connected to have sex. Some people have sex to feel connected. And usually those two people are living in the same house and they have no idea. And so it's really understanding like, when my partner has an orgasm, whether it's in my vagina or next to me, he just feels connected to me because he's close and we're naked, but maybe it doesn't need to be vaginal penetration all the time. And again, I think what that gets into is like heterosexual relationships have such a narrow version of what sex is. She might not want to be penetrated all the time, or it might hurt because she's had surgery or low estrogen or whatever else of like, how can we keep intimacy and fulfill people's needs and not make it completely all or nothing because our one menu item is now gone?
I love that.
Yeah, there's so many ways to have sex. There's so many different options on the menu, but we've been so trained to just think it's just penis and vagina, penis and vagina. And it's funny, like we don't, if like stereotypically, if like a woman doesn't have an orgasm, nobody considers that as like, oh, we didn't have sex, like you still had sex. But if you reverse it, sometimes it's like, oh, well, we didn't finish, like it didn't happen. But we just have to get out of those mind frames.
Yeah. And it's as devastating for the penis owner too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like when erectile dysfunction rears its ugly head, if we haven't worked on this, and that's why it's like, believe me, talk about sex in your relationship now, because there's going to be health issues. There's going to be a baby. There's going to be a death in the family. There's going to be stress at work. Like there's going to be menopause. Like there's going to be, and if you can always come back and be like, hey, we've talked about this before, we need to revisit it, versus like the one thing we did is broken. Now we don't have, and you'll see that you'll be like, we don't even hold hands. We don't go to bed at the same time. Like that one thing is broken. And then like all the intimacy goes away.
So you didn't learn any of this in medical school and residency in your practice, right? Like that is the part that I need people to understand is like how, when you have a medical problem, and these are all medical problems that deserve like biopsychosocial solutions. They don't all need pills. They don't all need injections. They don't all need, but there are a lot of biological things that we can do. My problem with it is that everyone goes to the therapist or goes to the snake oil and says, all of this can be talked about and negotiated. But as a doctor, that's not true, that there's a lot of biological stuff that we can do, but we're not educating the therapist in the biophysiology of sexual medicine. And we're not educating the doctors in the medical physiology of sexual medicine. And so we're kind of screwing it up here. So what have you discovered in this journey? And everybody go to the chat and ask questions, because we can start doing some questions too. So if anyone does have questions for Dr. Casperson, please put them in the chat.
So I have a sex therapist in my town, and this was when when Philbanserin was coming out. It was like just about to come out, so like a couple of years ago, and she was pissed. Like she's pissed that there's a medication for low desire. And I'm like, well, that's super interesting. Why? Right. And she's like, because it's so complex and people won't learn to talk to each other and they won't learn. Like she was so worried. And it's almost like high blood pressure, diabetes, pick some depression, right? Of like, we've got some medications, they don't always work. We've got some lifestyle stuff. It doesn't always work. Often in combination, it's much more powerful than like picking one. And my worry with meds is like that you're going to take a med and you're not doing all this other work. You're still pissed at your partner. You don't know where your clitoris is. Like, you've got all these other issues. And then you're like, the med didn't work.
So I will tell you a story. I had a patient recently who we did our 1 hour consult. We spent an hour together, and his concerns were premature ejaculation and erectile, what I would call dissatisfaction. And it really translated into, well, in the short amount of time, it's normal. 5.5 minutes is normal for penetration before man orgasms. His partner, she was not having, a good time. And so he thought he was a failure. I'm a failure as a partner. Many times it comes from the place of, I wish she was having more fun. They had been in couples therapy for a really long time. We had a long conversation, an hour, where we talked about all this stuff, right? We talked about the biology, the physiology, and we talked about what is sex? What does it mean? Where is she coming from? It was like a light bulb moment for this person. And we were able to start a low dose of a PD5 inhibitor, Cialis, to kind of help with the erection issues that he was having. We talked about, what's normal for orgasm. We did a follow-up visit, and he got it. He was like, oh my God, you completely changed the way that I think about sex. Like something just, it was like a moment where he was like speaking a language that was completely different than the language. I said, we only talked for an hour. Like, really? He's like, I've listened to some podcasts. I've done some reading. I had these conversations with my partner. He said the other night we had a sexual encounter, Dr. Rubin, that lasted a very long time. There was no penetration, and it was the best sex that we had had in years. And I was like,
God bless.
It was amazing. And we were able to do that and able to take the, what I actually think that works in my practice is I help biologicalize people. And I've made up that word on purpose. If I biologicalize you and I get you to understand your biology, well, then I can convince you that the work is worth doing, right? If you think it's all, because it's not all, your head is a part of your body, right? Your brain is a part of your body. So we can make it biology, we can make it physiology to get you to do the work, because you have to convince the person to do the work and you have to give them hope. So you can't just, you can't just say this is hard work, work hard. You have to give a pathway and a framework of how to get it to work. And sometimes medications can get you there.
100%. Yeah, totally. And I think, I mean, that's the thing of like, I think so many women are like, how do I talk to my spouse about like me having more fun in the bedroom? I don't want to hurt his ego. I don't want to, we're going to change things because I just don't want to lay there and, the pizza I'm having for dinner every night. And you don't realize like the dude's pretty stoked when you're having fun. Right. And here she's like, I don't know how to tell him that I actually want to have more fun. And I'm like, no, it's a good thing. It's a good thing for everybody to have more fun. And let's not be afraid of that conversation. But yeah, to think like, all the women are like, well, how come the men, it's like, they didn't get a better education than the women did.
No.
And they don't even own the body parts.
And-
Right. We got to give them.
One thing you mentioned before too about, faking orgasms and things like that. That is like so not helpful to anyone. But I think it's so common that people think, well, I just have to pretend that I'm having.
How do you undo it? How do you undo it? If you've been faking an orgasm
for a long time,
30 years, how do you undo? How do you hit undo?
The thing I heard that made a lot of sense to me is like, you got to take ownership of the role you're playing in that. Right. Because all the women are like, well, I'm doing it for him to protect his ego, or I'm doing it just to end the sex. You're a poor communicator.
Yeah. And
right?
You're hurting him, because that's going to hurt even more to find out like 30 years you've been faking this. And you're kind of lying to that person.
Yeah. I mean, I would say if you don't think admitting that you're faking, like that might not be beneficial to admit. And I don't recommend that people do it, right? You don't need to. You can just be like, hey, I'd like to try something new. I haven't been having as much pleasure lately as what used to work for my body. You can skirt around this stuff. Because to me, I'm like, is telling your partner I've just been faking it with you for 30 years, is that going to bring the relationship closer? It might not. But maybe we don't need to talk about the past. We can just talk about what we wish for the future.
So all of the advocacy work that you and I and many of our colleagues have been doing about menopause care and hormones and how hormones are important for sexual function. Tell us more about that journey, what it's been like for you. How receptive have your listeners and people in your circle been? And what are the changes that you've been seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I got into menopause and hormones because of my listeners. Like literally the podcast made me a hormone expert. Because you think about it, you're like, how did I get here? Like, how did I become a urologist who like knows more about menopause hormones than probably 98% of the doctors in America? Like, to be honest, at this point. And it's like, because the women demanded that I bring it. They demanded that I could give them accurate, because they now know me as like, I'm science-based. I talk about the research, and they're like, great. What's the hormones say? And the big myth that kept coming up is, well, ever since menopause, I lost my desire. Well, once I hit menopause, I'm not going to have a sex life, over and over and over again. And it was the same thing as the woman in the lightning bolt. Is it true? Do we have data to back that up? Or is this just another myth that we all keep perpetuating? Right. And so that was my start of going into like, turns out estrogen doesn't cause a lot of spontaneous desire. Estrogen can make you a little more receptive, but there's plenty of people not on hormones who are having the best sex of their lives. And so it's really like breaking that hormone myth apart and realizing what was fascinating about me diving into this research. There's 2 reasons that postmenopausal women stop having sex. Top 2 reasons. There's probably 237 reasons, but the top 2 reasons are
pain.
That's part of one of them. So one of them is availability of partner. And I'm like, that's something your urologist and doctor can't help you with, right? If there's not a partner around you, you might not be seeking out a sex partner. That's fine. So that was one of the top 2. The second one is vasomotor symptoms of menopause. So if you have hot flashes, you sleep poorly, your mood's messy, and you've got a dry vagina, your body's not healthy enough to want to have sex. So in that way, you give estrogen to fix the vasomotor symptoms, she has better sex. But it isn't a linear one-to-one that you need estrogen. Because as you know, lots of women go through menopause and don't have any of those symptoms. But vasomotor symptoms of menopause is one of the top 2 reasons that women stop having sex in peri and postmenopause.
All right, people, get your questions in now. You have the famous Dr. Kelly Casperson, who wrote the book, You Are Not Broken. You should get it on Amazon, and see that my name is mentioned in the book, which there aren't a lot of doctors mentioned in the book. So I'm just going to put that out there that you did mention me in the book. So I had a patient yesterday who was like so excited that you mentioned me. She said my doctor was in that book and she
You're
got
an expert.
So thank you for mentioning my name in the book.
Oh my gosh. Well, you're really, I think, the guru and go-to as far as, who's right and your experience in the medications.
Can you tell my husband that the who's right? That's good to hear. Say it louder. I don't think he's listening. Sorry, I cut you off there.
You're like, I got distracted. No, but like really, I think of you as the go-to because you have so much experience of like, who does respond to these medications, right? Like, who are you willing to prescribe on the first date, these medications? And like really speaking to that, because a lot of doctors don't have experience with these medications, but they're safe. When they work well, but they don't work for everybody.
Absolutely. And, well, we have people sort of all ages probably on the Zoom, and nobody's been brave enough to ask any questions, but that's okay. I have questions for days. What has been your biggest surprise with writing? Like, how do you know how to write a book? Can we start there? And what is what was the biggest surprise that you've got from reception from the book? And where are you going? You've already written a book. So what's the next step? Is there another book? Is there a movie?
Questions.
Yeah. Who's gonna play me, man? I'm Reese Witherspoon. I didn't know how to write a book. I know how to talk really well, right? Like podcast is going well. But to me, I'm like, I don't know how to write a book. So I actually had a professional who can write books, and I just talked to her for like 7 hours, made an appointment to talk to her. I'm like, basically, I'm going to talk my book to you. You organize it. And then when she gave it back to me, I was like, this isn't me. This isn't my voice. Thank you for the layout, which is what I needed, right? Like I needed structure. But then I rewrote it 5 times to make it my voice, because I'm like, when the topic's sex, like it's got to be my voice, my opinion, because otherwise you're getting somebody else's voice on it. So I rewrote it 5 times. I think the biggest surprise is nobody's told me they hated it yet. I'm like, clearly somebody's going to tell me I've done something wrong at some point, but like, I keep getting over and over, like it's approachable, it's quick, it's friendly, it's your voice. It's because I've read so many sex books now. Like there's really dry academic sex books, and I can name 5 of them. And I'm like, there's a reason that people
they're terrible. And it would be like, oh, this is going to be fun, and you're just like, I need to take a nap.
Yeah, they've got great names, and then you read it, and you're like, no.
But I always joke at conferences. I go to a lot of sex conferences and no one ever talks about sex. It's actually amazing. You can go to a whole conference about the Sexual Medicine Society of North America, the International Society for the Study of Women's Sexual Health, and we dance around it constantly. There's actually very little discussion of sex.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's, earlier when we were like, how come people don't know what the research is doing, right? Like it's because they aren't great communicators. Turns out I'm a great communicator. Like that's my skill. So that's what I'm going to do. But I mean, a great example of this is the heteronormative theory of low desire in women partnered with men.
Tell that story. I love that story.
This is like the best paper to come out of 2021. And a researcher in Canada, she's a very well-published sex researcher. She literally researches on like testosterone and hormones and desire and sex. And she comes out with this paper called The Heteronormative Theory of Low Desire in Women Partnered with Men. And I like came across it on my couch after the kids go to bed, which is when I read all my sex literature. And I was like, what the hell is this thing? This thing is amazing, because it was like, it's people's lived experiences. It's like, there's multiple reasons that we have low desire when we're partnered with men. And so I read the article on my podcast, and people are like, I've never listened to a medical article read on the podcast. That was the best thing ever. Please read more. And because I'm like inserting my opinion in there. And then I had her on and I'm like, everybody needs to know about this article. And she's like, oh, thanks. But like her job's not to, like, she just does the research.
Do you remember what podcast number it is so people can listen to it?
I know. No. I'm not good with numbers like that. Some people are. But it's two right in a row. One's literally the heteronormative theory, and then the one right after that is her. It's Sari Van Anders is her name.
So how we have a few more minutes. I think we'll cut off in a few more minutes so people can enjoy I can't believe we even have people on this right now it's a holiday weekend. You all should be at the beach or wherever people go on Labor Day and enjoy my birthday weekend. Where can people find you? Where you hang out on a lot of spaces? So tell us where we can find you.
My favorite's Instagram. So it's Kelly Casperson MD on Instagram. I'm a baby on TikTok. I'm only on there because somebody told me to be. And my podcast is You Are Not Broken. I have a baby YouTube. You Aren't Broken, I think, or Kelly Casperson. I don't know. I'm on YouTube if you Google me. The funny thing about the YouTube is because I also have my YouTube for my urology practice, which is very much, bread and butter urology. So I have a friend who's undergoing a hysterectomy rectocele in Texas, like next week or something. So she's Googling, YouTubing prolapse videos. And like I came up and so she watched me and she's like, oh, my friend is talking about rectoceles.
How fun. And for us, obviously you can find, as someone just asked, this is Andrea Sexplains. What is your Instagram?
Andrea Explains It All, like Clarissa Explains It All.
Oh, now I get it. Andrea Sexplains It All is very funny on Instagram.
Your Instagram is so good.
It's so good, right?
So
like
good.
She had a secret life of, I didn't know this when I hired her, that she was so funny. So it was a very pleasant surprise. It's so good. I am Dr. Rachel Rubin. So Dr. Rachel Rubin, that's my Instagram, our Facebook. We're just starting our YouTube channel where I'm loud and feisty on Twitter. And really join our communities. Facebook's a really great place. I put out a ton of therapy options on our Facebook page. So if you're in the DMV area, in the Washington, D.C. area, if there's a person with an opening in a sex therapy group or in a sex therapy practice, I post it to our Facebook page. So I'm really trying to get more events, more ways to give you all good information, to bring on guests like Dr. Kelly Casperson, because you are not broken and you deserve to understand that it can be fun and sex is fun and quality of life matters. And there are doctors out there who are really they're trying really hard and they want to listen and they want to help. And we have to work collaboratively with other providers to get you sort of the best life possible. And the most important piece is that you have to advocate for yourselves. You have to, in the bedroom, in the doctor's office, in the boardroom, you have to advocate for yourself because there are no adults coming to save the day. There's no one coming in to tell you and make your sex life better. Your partner does not know your buttons. They don't know what to press and how to press it unless you find out and tell them. And it's awkward, it's uncomfortable. Sex is super weird and strange and awkward and messy and gross and weird noises and all sorts of strange things. Get over it, talk about it, enjoy each other. It's about pleasure. It's very rarely, like Dr. Casperson said, about making babies. So have a good time and talk to each other. And if you can't, get a coach, get some help. Start by reading the book, You Are Not Broken, or listen to the podcast. Any closing words for us, Dr. Casperson?
Yes, I get a little bit when people are like, these are the 5 reasons why you should have an orgasm. It's good for your heart and you live longer, because it's almost like shoulding a woman to like that, why you should have better sex, right? So I always get a little bit like, what's my role in telling people how great this is? But I really think the skills we develop in learning to advocate for ourselves, come up with boundaries, when is a no, asking for what we want, communicating our feelings and needs. To me, I'm like the cup of sexual advocacy, right? It's the last stage in personal growth. And all of these skills spill over into like non-sexual relationships in your work environment and just you advocating for yourself with your health and with your friends. And so like, to me, I'm like, that's the reason to do this, because there's no there's no like, and on Tuesday, it'll just be great sex forever. Like there's no like achieving great sex. It's always a work in progress. And even the people who say like, I'm really great at sex, they're always learning. They're always figuring it out. Right. And so to me, I'm like, if you can look at it like personal growth and realize these skills will take you to 12 different places, if that's a better reason to do it, then like you'll sleep better.
Yeah.
Which
They're
is nice too.
basic life skills.
They're basic life skills. Totally.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I hope you come on your book tour and come to Washington, D.C. and stay at my house, and we can be friends. We're friends for life, which is very exciting. If you have questions, please reach out, info@rachelrubinmd.com. Sign up on our website to get our weekly newsletter at rachelrubinmd.com. And we're just all getting started. So I'm super excited. And thank you for coming, Kelly.
I love what you're doing.
Mwah. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Have a good weekend.
Take care.